As you work with more and more layers, one of the things that happens is that your layers panel might get a bit out of control. So in order to organize your layers, you can use layer groups. Not only do groups help you organize your layers, you can also move all of the layers in a group at one time. You can change the opacity and blend modes. You can even mask all of the layers or create special effects by adding layer effects to groups. So I'm going to start by selecting all 4 of the layers in my layers panel. If they're not selected, just click on the strawberries layer and then hold down the Shift key and click on the tomatoes layer, and that will select all of the layers in between. There's a lot of different ways that we can create a group. We can click on the folder icon at the bottom of the layers panel. That's going to create a group. Or I can use the keyboard shortcut Command G on Mac or Control G on Windows. That creates a group and it places whatever was selected into the group, but it does close the contents of the group. So in order to see the contents, we can just click on the disclosure triangle there. I'm also going to rename this group. I'll just call it Small Photos. And I know that it might seem like a little bit of overkill to always be renaming your layers and your layer groups, and it does take a little bit more time, but if you're working in any kind of collaborative environment and you're going to hand off your files to another artist or a production team, or even if it's just you that has to revisit the files later on to make changes, it really is to your advantage to keep track of all of your layers. All right, so with the group selected, if I select the Move tool and turn off the Auto Select option, well, with the group selected, you'll notice that I can quickly move all of the layers within that group. Now it's time to add a logo to this image, so I'm going to use Bridge to double click on this logo.psd file. And it's going to open up, and it's actually 2 different layers. So there's an ellipse layer, which is the circle, and then there's this text layer, but it's not actually text, it's a shape. And the reason it's a shape is because I wasn't sure what fonts you would have installed. And so instead of allowing for font substitution, I just turned the text layer into a shape layer. So I want to put both of these layers into a group. I will select them both by holding down the Command key on Mac or the Control key on Windows and selecting them, and then again using Command G on Mac or Control G on Windows. I'll double click on Group 1 and just rename it to Logo. Now I want to see both of my open documents, so I'll choose Window, Arrange, and then Tile. And I'll drag the logo group into the harvest image, but I might want to look at what's targeted in the harvest image. So I'll select it. We can see that the Small Photos group is targeted. So if I return to the logo and drag and drop it, holding down the Shift key, it's actually going to place it within that group, which is fine because we can change the stacking order of groups. I just wanted to point out that it might be advantageous to look at where you're going to drop the images when you're adding additional layers. All right, let's close the logo.psd file. To take the logo group out of the Small Photos group, I can just click and drag it. Now I need to drag it not on top of it where I see the cyan outline all the way around the Small Photos group, but a little bit higher so that I just see the one cyan line. And then I can release the cursor, and now my logo group will be removed from that Small Photos group. Now I want to change the opacity of the logo, and I can do that in a variety of different ways, depending on whether or not I want to decrease the opacity of all of the layers in the group or just a single layer. So I'm going to use the disclosure triangle to show the contents of the logo group, select the ellipse, and then I can use the opacity slider in the layers panel by either clicking on the word opacity and dragging to the left to decrease the opacity or dragging to the right to increase it. I can select the text entry area and then enter in like 50%, or I can use the drop-down menu and use the slider. But I actually think it's easiest because I have the Move tool selected. I can just tap like the 8 key, and that will give me 80% of opacity on my layers panel. In fact, if I type quickly like 56, it'll give me 56%. Now, if I tap 0, it'll go to 100%. And if I tap 0, 0 quickly, it will give me 0%. But I'm going to put it back to 80, so I'll tap the 8 key. If I wanted to change both the text and the ellipse at the same time, then I could target the logo group and change the opacity. With the logo group selected and the Move tool selected, I'll go ahead and just drag that up a bit in the image area and make sure that it's centered there using the Smart Guides to help me. Now, when I brought in all of these small images down here along the bottom, they were all the correct size, but they're also squares. And what if I wanted to change them into circles? Well, I'm going to select the Frame tool and then choose the second option here to create an ellipse or a circle. And I'll start with the strawberries layer, so I'll target it. And the way I need to draw with this is I need to imagine that I'm drawing a rectangle, so I'm looking at the upper left-hand corner. So I'll click here and then start dragging down to the right. And it actually looks like it's dragging out a square or a rectangle. But when I release my cursor, sure enough, I get an oval or a circle. I'll move to the peppers layer and then I'll click and drag out again. You can see that I'm using the Smart Guides in order to help me snap to the edges of each one of these photographs. So at this time, I'll go ahead and do a file save as again. I'm going to save it to my computer and I'm going to go ahead and check this don't show again and choose save on my computer. If I did want to save it in the future to a cloud document, I could select that right here. But let's go ahead and just rename this to O2 as a Photoshop document in that same folder with layers. I'll go ahead and click Save, and there we are. If I close this using Command W on Mac and then use Command Tab or Control Tab to go to Bridge, we can see there's that Harvest O2 file.